So, to fill in any of you who weren't aware, Avian Omens is an EP that I made about 3 years ago now, I think, off the top of my head, where essentially the main sort of gimmick was that I really like having themes with my EP. Like, I'm not the kind of person who likes to just drop an EP with like a bunch of random tracks in a group that don't really mix. And so I wanted the theme here to be something where it was still abstract enough that like I could make some very different tracks and still put them in the same EP and still have them have fitting titles, but not so abstract that it gets to the point where, again, it's just a bunch of random tracks put in a random box and there's no reason why they're together. And so I had the idea for the Avian Omens EP because I just recently, kind of by coincidence really, had been learning about how weirdly many words there are that can either mean something to do with birds or mean something horrible, which might sound weirdly specific, but when I tell you the names of these tracks, it'll make sense. Originally, when I wanted to make this EP, the plan was to make 5 tracks, because I thought, while I'd made 6 in the past, this was going to be a tall order. I would have to spend ages making this EP, and so I really thought that 6 might have been a bit of a stretch, especially since a lot of dubstep EPs only tend to have 4 tracks. So even though I typically had done 6 in the past, I thought I'll do 5 this time. And then I did 6 anyway, because I started making one of the tracks, and I started realizing I'm not sure if I want to do this for one of them, but I don't want to scrap this either, and so eventually it turned into an intro track. A shorter and less high effort track, but still a track that was included in the EP, and still, one I finished. And that is this track, Omen. Now, Omen kind of breaks the naming convention. It's just called Omen, but the rest of the tracks in this EP are all called what they are for a very specific reason. The other tracks are Murder, Piteousness, Foul, Eerie, and Unkindness. Now, believe it or not, all of those words can actually be very related to birds. I'm sure you know about some of them. A murder is a name for a group of crows. A piteousness is the name for a group of doves. Foul, obviously, there is foul with a U and foul with a W, whereas foul with a W obviously means birds. Eerie, I actually have a bit of a regret on. I typed it Eerie as in E-E-R-I-E, and I knew that Eerie also meant an eagle's nest, but I must admit I'd only ever heard that spoken, not typed, and I didn't realise that the eagle's nest version is E-Y-R-E, so I kind of wish I called it Eerie as in E-Y-R-E now. I would go back and change the name retroactively, but then it might confuse people trying to find the track, so I thought, whatever, I'll leave it. I'm sure people get the double meaning at this point if they're paying attention. And an unkindness is a group of ravens. So yeah, that's the kind of theme of this EP. I thought it was a really cool idea for a theme. I still am quite happy with it. But as well as that, this track, as I mentioned, it's lower effort. I'll start playing it in a moment. Since it wasn't even originally planned to be made, it was just, this is going to waste otherwise, so I may as well turn this into a sort of shorter introductory track. But still, I think it turned out relatively good, but of course I'm going to have some criticisms of it. And again, now we're getting to the older track territory. You might notice the mastering quality sort of drop a little bit. Here we go. So to turn it down briefly, just as we get to the build-up, this is what I had earlier when I decided, okay, I'm going to split this off into its own separate project so this doesn't go to waste. think I've let that play relatively long enough, so I'll keep it quiet now so I can get some commentary in for a moment. So yeah, you get the idea. This is a quote-unquote pretty basic structure, but again, it's not supposed to be quite as high effort as the other tracks, so that's to be expected. But there's still some good basses in here. I even decided that I would bother to add a little B section here where it changes. So yeah, of course, being a little introductory track, it's a lot shorter than the others, but still a relatively respectable length. So yeah, that being said, of course, there's a decent amount of mistakes here. I mean, right now you're going to be hearing one. Well, probably not so much because I've turned it down a lot, but as this fades in, it peaks quite a lot. There's a lot of audio quality lost from it trying to be too loud, and it's not very pleasant on the ears. As well as that, this opening section is mostly pretty good, but I do think in hindsight it's a little bit dull. I think I was just really happy because before this point I'd never had a good trombone sound. It's really hard to get good sounding real instrument sounds in things like FL Studio because a lot of the kind of plugins people use for that tend to be absurdly expensive and record real orchestras, and of course I'm trying to get what I can free. But I managed to do some mastering and get the stock FL Legacy trombone to sound actually pretty good. Anyway, as for the drop, we got surprisingly a synth that I'm actually still pretty happy with. This Serum kind of growl, this FM growl, that is the kind of main meat of this drop. I thought that this might not age well because it is very basic in concept, but honestly, I can't lie, it's well made, so I was quite happy with that. On the other hand, this other kind of synth that comes in as a sort of call and response, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back again, just to keep it playing. This sound, like if I mute some things, this sound, I have mixed feelings on this. In fairness, I think it's a really interesting sound, and I made it, like, while making this track, and I'm just like, this is too interesting, I've got to use it. But I definitely struggled to get it to sound good. I don't even remember what I did, because obviously it's too long ago, but I spent a while trying to get this to a point where it sounded good, and I don't think it sounds bad, but I do think there's a noticeable lack of impact on it. You know, it kind of blends a little bit into the general noise going on here, which is a bit of a shame, really. But still, it's a pretty interesting sound. I'm not sure I've made many other sounds that really sound much like this, so I gotta give it points for uniqueness. I also want to take a moment to point out that in the background, this sort of, like, glitchy, choir orchestra thing, it's a bit subtle. I really like how this turned out. Let me turn it up, actually. This might be a good time to mention as well. I should have mentioned this earlier, in fact. There isn't many times where it happens here, but in some of these tracks we're going to look at, you're going to have to remember that I made these tracks on my laptop. This caused a lot of limitations, a lot. And most of these projects could barely survive being opened for just a few minutes on my laptop once they were finished. That's how, like, you know, tough it got. And so, as a result, there were lots of moments where, unfortunately, I completely deleted the original synths and just put recordings of them in for the sake of making it run smoother, because it's easier to just play a recording of an instrument than to actually simulate everything that goes into producing the sound. So that's what's going on here. These would usually be like an instrument that I had made and would just be playing it, but because these instruments were laggy, I just simply recorded their sounds and put them in here because it reduced the lag to do it that way. I didn't do it that much with this project since it's smaller than the other ones, but the other ones I had to do that a little bit more if I remember correctly. So yeah, in fact, if you're wondering, the way I've had to open these is through sort of a zip file instead of a normal FL Studio save file, so that it keeps all the samples from this, because some of the samples in this project otherwise technically don't exist on my PC, they only exist on my laptop. So yeah, anyway, oh, and also, of course, that is literally just an FM bass, but it's a very satisfying FM bass. So I have to just give it a brief spotlight. Speaking of satisfying an FM bass, that seems to be kind of the theme going on here. This sound, I will say, is like the jewel of this track. Honestly, in my opinion, this. Let me turn it up actually. Yeah, this is easily the best sound in this track. This came out so good, and I'm so surprised because I was trying something kind of different with this, and it was a little bit complicated to set up, but it came out so good. Honestly, like, when I first made this track, I was kind of apprehensive, because while I didn't want to put all this to waste, I did think this track's just going to turn out worse than the others, like, just factually, practically, because I also don't want to dedicate too much time to it, since I never even planned on making it anyway. I did still dedicate quite a bit of time to it anyway, but there were some times where I might have put a bit more polish into sounds, but I just stopped it because I thought, this is already kind of a quote-unquote bonus track, so I don't want to spend too long on it. But this turned out so good that it just adds so much to the track, just this existing in it, in my opinion. The main section where things get a bit rough, though, is the B section, which, to be fair, I can't beat myself up about it too much, because the inclusion of this in the first place is like a bonus, really. This track could have just ended right here. So, part of me thinks that, like, it's good that this exists, but part of me does think, oh, some of the sounds in this B section are just not good. And I kind of knew they weren't good, but I also thought, this project is starting to crumble at the seams again with lag and me struggling to do it with my laptop, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, and I'd already spent a long time, way longer than I thought I would. So I thought, I can't really go back and be really picky about these sounds. So there's a couple I want to call out. Personally, I actually think this first sound is pretty good. I could see some people disliking it because it's very weird and in terms of pitch. But actually, the sound that I'm really off-put by is this, which when I first made it, I actually thought was pretty okay. A little bit rough around the edges, but fine. But honestly, I feel like this is too rough. There's almost no pitch to this. This is a little bit basic, but it's very pleasant. In fact, it does sound really good, genuinely, even though it's basic. And unfortunately, I have to say, this was the last thing I added to this track. It was a very late addition. I just thought I should fill this out a bit more, because I thought this sounded a bit empty. But in hindsight, I genuinely think that's better without this bass here. Yeah. It's something I didn't really notice until later. Now, it's funny, these kind of sounds swapped place in terms of my opinion of them. Because this sound used to be the one that I thought, oh, this turned out terrible, but I can't get it sounding better than this and all that. And this one was the thought, oh, it's just a bit of rub around the edges, but it's fine. But now I think it's the other way around. I think this one came out terrible, but this one came out kind of alright, just a little bit rough around the edges. Yeah. And then it goes into minor key. End of track. Alright, well with that then, let's open up Murder.
Not if I have anything to say about it, and I do. I'm gonna say the N-word.